My name is Dominique Mohammed. I'm 29 years old. I'm from Portland, Oregon. And this past year, I've faced and defeated one of the toughest battles that I've ever faced in my life. When I was 20 years old, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma stage 4. I'm gonna bring on fellow cancer survivors to show you guys not only that you can beat any cancer, but that you can beat your zombie, whatever that is in life.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of BeastvsZombie. Today I have a special guest with me, Sonny Shnayderman. He has an extremely impactful story about overcoming cancer. Before we get into it, make sure to follow the podcast on all social media platforms at BeastvsZombie. Subscribe on YouTube and Spotify podcasts to see the full videos and stay up to date on new episodes. So let's get into it today. We're going to start with the end in mind. So I know you just reached your 5-year mark, which is very impactful. If you guys don't know, at 5 years, you're considered cured in the cancer world. So how did you feel when you finally kind of got to this stage? I know that was just like last week, right?
It was, yeah. So I just got back from MD Anderson. I had my 5-year bone marrow biopsy in Houston, and the results were great. And I couldn't have been happier. I had 100% engraftment with my sister's DNA. So her cells, her T cells, and her myeloid cells are 100% what's producing in my body. And I feel definitely a sense of relief. Part of it is also kind of like all right, here's my chance to start my life in the direction that I want it to go. Because you're trying to do things, but then you're always thinking in the back of your mind, oh, what if I don't have the result I want, or I don't the results don't come back the way I wanted, and that could just turn everything upside down. So I'm just happy to be able to kind of, obviously nothing's impossible. I could relapse, but since I have this 5-year mark, I feel comfortable moving forward and pushing Infinite Motive, building my brand out, and focusing on the work.
Cool. And so share a little bit about what you do with Infinite Motive.
Infinite Motive is it's an e-commerce cancer awareness clothing brand, and the purpose of it is to build a cancer community, and I call it a cancer culture. It gives 10% of net proceeds to the corresponding cancer foundation. So if you were to have kidney cancer and you bought a kidney cancer t-shirt, the 10% will go towards a kidney cancer foundation. And so that's what I'm trying to build out. There's a lot of angles to it, but mainly it's to just build a cancer culture, make everybody feel like there's a community that they can go to when you're diagnosed with cancer, and make it a little bit more comfortable than it was for you and I.
That's cool. So make sure to go follow them. Where can they follow you at on social media?
Infinite.motive on Instagram, and Infinite Motive Official is on YouTube. On YouTube, I do a How to Cope with Cancer series, and I post it on Instagram as well, but all the parts are on YouTube available.
Cool. So you mentioned you're living with your sister's cells now.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And so to relate to that, I now live with my dad's cells. So what was that process like going through a bone marrow transplant, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was, it's such a confusing experience because you've never even known what this was prior, or most people wouldn't. And so to learn about it as you're going into it, signing off on the paperwork to get it all done. And I actually had somebody that had a really bad case of GVHD that was working with me to sign all the paperwork. And so I got a preview into what it could look like if things don't go super well. GVHD is graft versus host disease. That's when the donor cells attack your body as a foreign body, and that could range anywhere from skin issues to organ failure to death. So, and you never know until you do the transplant how your body's going to react to it. So that was kind of scary, especially seeing it in front of you. But I was hopeful because my sister's cells were 100% match. I was fortunate enough to have that happen. And that was kind of my ace in the hole, because initially with my diagnosis, they wanted to beat it with just chemotherapy. And I relapsed, and the only option after that was bone marrow transplant. So I was fortunate enough to have 100% match with my sister.
Cool. Man, I'm glad you
me
hit this
too.
mark.
Yeah.
So what kind of chemo treatments did you go through before it led up to your doctor saying, hey, the chemo's not working, you're relapsing, we should do now a bone marrow transplant?
So my induction chemo was actually at Summerlin Hospital in Las Vegas. That's where I was diagnosed, and they started chemo immediately because I already had 80% of my cells were cancerous. And so it was, I totally blanked, I'm sorry. We're gonna have to cut that part. What was the question?
It's okay. So what was your process and what kind of chemo treatments did you do before your doctors led up to the point where they wanted you to do a bone marrow transplant?
Gotcha. It's so the first induction round was called 7+3. It's a 2-week, I believe, chemotherapy process of idarubicin, doxorubicin, Red Devil, and so they did that mixed with I can't remember the name of the other chemo at the moment, but 7+3 is like the general process that you go through upon having a blood cancer, from what my understanding is. Did you have 7+3 as well?
So my situation was way different, right? You had leukemia.
Yes.
So I had Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Right.
So it's almost a blood cancer and technically treated as a blood cancer once you get to certain stages. So my original chemo treatment was like an ABVD treatment. It had the Red Devil in it.
Okay.
And it was a 6-month treatment. I relapsed, and then I did some immunotherapy treatment to get me into remission originally I did my first bone marrow transplant and gave myself my own cells.
Right.
And then that actually didn't even work. I went through all of that and it didn't even work. And I ended up doing immune therapy, and I was in remission for 3 years, and then relapsed again, and then got another bone marrow transplant using my dad's cells.
It's sad because you say the words and there's like not enough weight to it, you know? Because it's like you just say, oh, I relapsed and I did this. And it sounds so easy, but it's like, coming from understanding what goes into that and what your process is, it's unfortunate. I mean, fortunate for people to not have to experience it, but for them to not really know just how extensive that kind of treatment is and the kind of side effects you're going to go through, the lifelong issues that you deal with from it. And there's no way to put out enough words to explain exactly how intense this entire process is. And the other part is that I feel like cancer is an umbrella term. Just like I asked you if you did 7+3, there's so many different types of cancers, types of treatments, the way the doctors want to approach it. And it's just, I think cancer is such a complex term, and it's just used to cover like such a broad area of problems. So it's just interesting to me that, our treatment, we both had blood cancers, but completely different treatments in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's so many different types of cancer, and it seems like more and more people just keep getting cancer.
Yeah.
It seems like it keeps increasing.
Especially amongst the young crowd.
Right, because like for me, I was diagnosed when I was 19.
Yeah.
I was 19. I'm an athlete. I'm super healthy. I might not eat the healthiest in the world, but I'm working out at least 5 days a week, playing basketball all the time, like in great shape. Like, no way I'm thinking I'm gonna get cancer.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's even younger than I was 27, I believe. And
That's
still to me, I was just like, I couldn't believe that this is real. And you go to these cancer centers and, it's almost all people over the age of 50, 60 and up. And they're all looking at you like, what are you doing here? And then now I go back for these yearly checkups until this was my last one. But I felt like I started to see more and more young people each time I would go to the cancer center, which is just, there's no excuses for it. Nobody has a reason why. It's just like we're slowly watching this happen, and it sucks is what it is.
It's super scary.
It is.
So how did you feel when you were initially diagnosed? When you said you were 27?
Yeah.
When you were 27 years old, diagnosed with cancer, how did you feel about what was going on?
I felt like in some ways the benefit that I had was it was such a whirlwind process of you're sick, we need to take a blood test, a biopsy, and now you're immediately getting a chest port put in and going straight to chemo. And because it was so crash course, I think it kind of didn't allow me to dwell on it much. You're just, next thing you know, you're just going through chemo, and you didn't really know anything about it prior to that. And in some ways, I think it's beneficial because it doesn't give you time to start ruminating and losing your mind about what's going on, because you just have to start going. And I mean, it's still sad. I think the hardest part for me is watching my parents fall apart during this process, emotionally and just bandwidth wise. There was so much that needed to happen that nobody was prepared for. And it's not like you just started day one and this is everything you have to do. It's like you had your normal life before this with all the problems that come with that. And then now you're like, okay, now you have to start this whole other life on top of it. And so for me, the most painful part was having my parents have to go through it and watch them suffer. While obviously it's suffering for us too, but that's the most painful part for sure.
That was tough for me, for sure. I know, and I share this story almost every podcast. Like my dad, when I was initially finally diagnosed, we're going through the process. We're doing the biopsies and the PET scans and stuff like that. And he asked me, like, son, how are you feeling? Like they're telling you have cancer, right? And I just remember, I always say this, I try to lead by example with my attitude through this whole process.
Yes. For
my parents, for anybody that supports me, so that, they're giving me the best energy that they can give me. And I believe I needed that. I believe I needed to show up for them in this sense, because I also, like, going into this didn't have like all these crazy side effects where I felt extremely unhealthy.
Right.
Like, and like you said before, you had a healthy lifestyle, a healthy life. In your mind, you were normal.
I was at the best fitness I've ever been in.
I was
right when it happened.
Fitness when it happened.
It was crazy. And how is it exactly that you found out?
So I had a lump in my neck. And at the time I had gotten in a car accident maybe a month or two before. So I was still going to my chiropractor, and I asked him to rub this knot out of my neck. And we got through the session, and he was like, I can't rub this out. You should go see a doctor, which led me to, right, I'm just thinking, okay, what is the doctor gonna say?
Yeah,
something small. I go to the doctor, and immediately the urgent care doctor that I see at the time, he knew right on the spot. He was like, well, I can't diagnose you. We have to do tests on biopsy and scans, but you have cancer. And he was very, very confident in that answer.
Wow.
And he was right. He knew right away.
How did you take it when he said it to you initially?
I thought there was no way. I thought he was lying. I didn't believe him, right? And we hadn't done the test yet. So I was like, no way. Like, I understand you're confident, right? Yeah, but no
wrong.
way I have cancer. Yeah. Like, I'm super healthy. Like, absolutely not. That couldn't be me.
Yep. I mean, that kind of disbelief, I think, is normal, because it's just such a mind-blowing and life-altering incident. It's like you see it in movies, you hear about it, you read it in books. It happens to old people, but you never anticipate it happening to you, especially at this age. It's crazy.
Right. And so you mentioned a little bit, it was tough on your parents. How did your friends, family, your parents, if you have any siblings, how did they take it? How did they respond throughout this whole process?
So I had a mixture. I think the social aspect of going through cancer is a whole other, dragon to slay, because it's a complexity that you never had to think about in your life before. And you suddenly have I had friends that were with me my whole life that suddenly stopped talking to me. I had, falling out with some people, and then I had strengthening of bonds with other friends. And I had friends that showed up at the hospital right when I got diagnosed. I had my family support was, nonstop from the start. I had my parents, my sister and her husband flew in right when I was starting my first dose of chemotherapy. I had the company that I was working for at the time, VShred, was covering all my expenses, no questions asked, just endless support from everyone. And so you juxtapose that with the falling out of relationships with others, and it almost, I think you end up showing more grace and just wishing them well and cutting ties that way, because it's like you already have enough on your plate. The weight is already so heavy. I don't need to add more and carry that around. So that's how I was with it.
Right. Yeah, that's tough. I know for me, it was the same type of social thing.
Yep.
Same type of social thing. Some people that you never would have thought support you came out of the woodwork and were there for you. Some people that you thought would be there since day one. Like, I had a girlfriend of like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Then like we at a point just stopped talking. So like there's all types of weird social stuff that goes on that could make you feel, I guess, a certain type of way.
Yeah.
But I always say, and I always really appreciate cancer. It really showed me like who's in my corner.
For sure.
Like who could I go to war with, right? And who really is actually there to support me in some of the toughest times that I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, you learn a lot about people around you. You learn a lot about trust. And I think that you for your own mental health, learn a lot about showing people grace. Because it's, like I said, it's just, you could carry it around like a pit in your stomach forever, or you can just let go, and letting go is going to give you way more peace at the end of the day. Because yeah, it's like you said, how could somebody that's been with you for 10 years drop you like nothing and just stop talking? Ghosting somebody that you've known for that long is crazy. And that's just another aspect of the complications of going through treatments and going through the disease. So
yeah, that was definitely a part of cancer that was kind of crazy to navigate. So I know you spoke earlier, you talked about some residual side effects that you have going, like now that you're 5 years, you're technically cured, that you're still dealing with. I know we talked about it earlier as well. What kind of stuff are you still dealing with even after being cured from cancer?
Well, there's medications that I'll be on for the rest of my life. My thyroid function is completely gone from the damage of chemo, so I'm on thyroid medication. I have congestive heart failure, so I'm on medication for that. Valtrex, because there's certain it's an antifungal. If you're probably on Valtrex as well. So that was in replacement for one of the vaccines that they decided not to get because of complications that can happen with transplant patients. I'm on testosterone once a week injections because my body stopped creating it. There's definitely things that are just, stuck with you long term. My hairline's never coming back. You know what I mean? There's just certain things that you just, they're going to be with you forever. And I think that the cup half full approach to that is that we have perspective that you can never take away from us, and an understanding of life that you can't really have until you've been faced with your own mortality, the challenges that you go through socially. Survivorship, I think, is almost as complex as going through cancer treatment-wise. So,
and that's what people say. A lot of people have challenges after they've been cured, and like you said, in survivorship, dealing with their side effects, mentally getting back to a normal life. Yeah. For me, I always feel like I have it so much easier than everybody, all the stories that I bring on. Like, I'm not on any medications.
Oh, really?
And we both had a bone marrow transplant.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how different every situation could be. Obviously, we had different types of cancers.
Right.
But even, like, I have a buddy that I interviewed, Cody. He had run the Boston Marathon. Like, a month later, he had gotten Hodgkin's lymphoma. We were diagnosed with the same cancer. He was treated with the same treatment. In the first 6 months, he was cured. it took me 10 years.
I know.
It took me 10 years. So we were in the same situation.
But you're put in the same category.
Same category, but it's still way different.
Yeah, 100%.
It's still way different. We both have bone marrow transplants dealing with way different side effects.
Yeah.
I know for me, the biggest thing for me recently is I don't have oxygen flowing to my hip. So my hip is dead right now. So I'm on the verge of getting a hip replacement. So I'm 30 years old, about to get a hip replacement. That's like a weird side effect that I never really thought I would get. And it's just a side effect from the medications that got me, that beat cancer. So like I couldn't change that.
They were necessary at the time.
And I definitely wanted that to happen, you know? So you were talking a little bit about your perspective. How do you think your perspective has changed now that you've gone through, you could say a traumatic event, you could say a life-altering event.
Yeah.
I always try to say it was one of the best things that happened to me. How has your perspective changed from that?
It's funny you said that. I always tell my parents that if it was outside of them having to go through the suffering of watching me do all this, I'm eternally grateful for the experience. I think that it provides you an understanding of what life is all about. But I also think it gives you a fork in the road. I think that maybe you can agree with this, that you reach this point during treatments that you can either choose to get very bitter and resentful and angry with everyone around you about how unfair your situation is, or you can choose the path of gratitude and being present and understanding the value of this moment and how to actually look at life from that perspective instead of being a victim to everything around you. And I think that once you hit that fork in the road, if you make that decision, you end up like us with a ton of gratitude and being happy that we went through this experience and obviously came out of it alive and well, relatively well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think from people that knew me before, I've become a lot more laid back. I think I was frantically trying to prove myself to be, you know, a successful guy in work and trying to make an income, and you know, everything that society tells you is important in terms of, you know, what you have to do to get ahead in life. And once you get hit with something like this, you realize that if you don't have your health, you don't have anything, and it's all irrelevant. And so it made me slow down and realize what's most important in life.
I agree. It definitely made me grateful for the small things, like getting out of bed in the morning. There was times when I couldn't get the strength or I didn't have the energy to get out of bed until late in the afternoon or something like that. It definitely makes me appreciate the small things a lot more.
That's right.
It makes you slow down. You care about, you have a different priority on the things that you care about and the things that are most important to you. Even during the treatment, right? Like when I first started, I just dropped all my responsibilities. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that.
Right.
And I was in college at the time. I had just started attending UNLV, and I just dropped all my responsibilities, went home and did my treatments and focused on being healthy. I just played as much basketball as I could during all the treatments.
Wow, that's incredible.
I just focused on being healthy. I didn't focus on anything else. And like I said, I was lucky to be able to do that. But eventually I got to a point as well where I was like, okay, I can do this and I can go back to work. I can do this. And I actually finished and graduated college the same year and close in months that I was officially in remission the first time.
Wow.
So it was like a big milestone. I had graduated. I felt amazing. I felt like I beat cancer. And then 3 years later, you know, it comes back.
Yeah.
The process, then I was already very confident, like, oh, well, I beat this, you know, I just got to beat this again. And I did, thankfully.
Right.
But that was also a way different process as well. Like the difference in the transplant is giving myself my own cells, opposed to getting my dad's cells now, was like night and day.
Oh, was it? I was curious about that because I don't know how like with your own cells, is it, do they have to bring you down to zero?
Yeah, so it's similar process. Originally, right, you get down to no cells through whatever treatment they do.
Right.
That was the first time I ever lost my hair all the way.
Okay.
Like my hair would get thin, but I never had lost all my hair. So I just had it short and it was thin.
Yeah.
I remember I was in the shower and I just rubbed my hair off. Like I had shaved it off because it was already getting thin. And then I was in the shower and I was looking down and I was like, wow, there's all this hair. And I just proceeded to start rubbing my head and it just all just slicked off.
Yeah.
And that was when I was like, oh wow, this is real. This is real. But the first transplant was very straightforward. I collected my own cells, so
Right.
you know how your sister gave herself the injections,
Right.
and then they collect it over a couple hours, and then they store them for. So I collected my own cells. So then it seemed like such a straightforward process. The biggest difference that I noticed was once you did the actual transplant, which is crazy. A bone marrow transplant sounds like this huge thing, and it's like a 15-minute transfusion, blood transfusion.
Yeah.
And
Just a different colored bag.
and so they give you your transfusion, and the biggest difference that I found between them is, right, when you're given somebody else's cells, those cells, they allow them to attack your body for the first day so that they can make that medication to tell your cells, communicate to your cells that, hey, you're in the right body, like you should just, this is the right place.
Interesting. I think that might be different because if your match was different than mine.
Yeah.
I didn't have any kind of medication like that.
You didn't?
I think I might have had some preventative chemo. There was like one other chemo that they added on right after transplant, but I'm wondering if it's because the match percentage is different for you than it is for me.
Because mine was just 50-50.
Right.
And yours is 100,
100%.
which I don't think I could ever get a 100% match because I know I was in a database and they couldn't find a 100% match.
Yeah.
And like I told you before, like in that 3-year span between both of my transplants, technology had evolved so much. Like the first transplant, there wasn't even an option to do possibly a half match, or even like my sister was a quarter match. That wasn't an option, but then 3-4 years later, however long that was in between, now I could do a half match, is what I did and got me into remission now, or even a quarter match of my sister. And so that's how far technology had evolved just in that time. Yep. But that is interesting that we had completely different transplant
Well, and it's crazy because I remember walking in the halls because you had to stay inpatient when you had the transplant.
For about a month.
Yeah, exactly. Same with me. And you would walk the halls and you would meet people that had non-Hodgkin's, Hodgkin's, everybody had these different, I think there was even, is it MS, multiple sclerosis, that they do the transplant for? And yeah, so you see all these different cases and you know that you're all going through the same thing. And you could smell it when you walk by the rooms because a lot of people don't know that the preservative that stem cells are kept in smells like corn, cream corn, and nothing makes me more nauseous than thinking about that cream corn smell. And you could tell who was having a transplant because if you are doing laps in the hall, you can smell it coming out of their room. It comes out of your skin, it comes out of your clothes, and I hope I never smell that again. Unless I'm like, coming to deliver a charity check to somebody, but that was rough. So.
And to give you context, right, so when you're in the hospital getting a bone marrow transplant, you're quarantined to one floor because you're immune compromised, you have no cells in your body. And so you're on one floor and they encourage you to get as much activity as possible. And at that point, when you have no cells, you really have no energy. So the most you could do really is just walk around. So I would just basically pace and walk around and do laps on the single floor that I was quarantined to for a month. And I went in obviously a little more active. So I'm like, this is probably crazy, but I'm like going through the halls, like doing lunges, like doing like jump skips, like to start off because I felt pretty solid in the beginning, and then you eventually get to no cells, you have low energy, walking. There was a spin, like a stationary bike that I would try to use as much as possible.
Yeah.
But The craziest thing about my transplants that were night and day as well was one was pre-COVID and then one was during COVID. So pre-COVID was all. This is probably why it was way easier as well, was because I could have all my friends and family visit me as long as they passed the precautions to get onto the floor. Like my nephew was too young, so they wouldn't let him on.
Right.
But most of my friends and family could all come visit me. They bring me food. We could play card games, video games. We had like a guest room where we're all hanging out, and it made that whole situation way easier. The second one was during COVID.
So nobody was allowed in.
So it was only my mom and I. It's only my mom and I. We're watching movies. The finals are on, so I'm watching NBA finals.
I was watching playoffs too.
But my mom also is going home, so I'm like playing video games. I beat a whole Assassin's Creed game. I think in like probably like maybe like the first week or something, and I was just like maxed out on video games. And so yeah, that support, those situations were very night and day in that sense.
Definitely.
And made the world difference in those situations for sure.
Definitely. It's funny you brought up COVID, because after my transplant, there's, the first 100 days are crucial for not getting infection, not getting rejection from the stem cells. And I had just gotten done with the 100 days, which means you're allowed to like go outside. And so I'm all excited. We set up a day, I'm all like, masked up, covered up. I go out, we go to watch, I think it was 1917, the war movie. We go to the movie theater, watch it. Cool, good time. We like covered the seats, just protected everything. We get home, the next day the country goes on lockdown and you're not allowed outside. So we went from the 100 days of not being able to go outside, getting one day to go outside, and then back to lockdown for everybody. And now not only is everybody locked down, everybody's wearing a mask. So now what used to be, oh, that guy is sick, we should probably kind of watch out for him or be careful with him, became you're just another person wearing a mask amongst thousands of other people wearing a mask. So you're not getting any kind of, I don't want to say special treatment, but an understanding, oh, he might not be well, give him some space. Now it's just everybody's the same. And I remember I went to a Starbucks and I was wearing a mask, and it was right before the lockdown, I think. And she goes, oh, that's what I'm talking about. And I was like, no, that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about COVID, and I'm fighting for my life through a bone marrow transplant. I didn't say it to her, but that's how it felt. And so that challenge, there's mental challenges that we go through in the process, and that's what I mean by the outside factors still apply. What happens to the world around us is still going to have its own problems on top of whatever we're dealing with, and it's just one of the challenges.
That's crazy. And so were you in Las Vegas?
No, I was in Houston. Yeah, because I stayed, when I went to MD Anderson knowing that I was going to get treatment there, we got an apartment in the same complex as my sister, and I stayed there for the next 2 years. Because after, I don't know if you had this, but after bone marrow transplant, I had a year of maintenance chemo. So I was on a shot, I think it was a week out of every month I had to go in and get shots, which would leave like huge sores on my stomach. But it was still nothing compared to doing inpatient stays and dealing with the infections and all of that. Yeah. But yeah, so we stayed there an extra year after the year of treatments that I had already had at MD Anderson. So we were in Houston until that finished up, and then we came back to Las Vegas.
Okay. So what was that process like? Do you have family that lives there? Were you guys just in a hotel that whole time?
So the craziest part about actually the whole story is that when I got diagnosed, my sister was doing her rotations in children's hematology at MD Anderson, because she's a doctor and her husband's a doctor. Wow. And so it was just by weird luck, I don't want to say great luck, but weird luck that she was already in Houston, already in a top cancer center in the world. And so when they told me that, oh, we don't do bone marrow transplants in Las Vegas, the number one option immediately was to go to Houston. And so they were there for rotations throughout the entire time that I was getting treatments, and it worked out perfectly. She could basically get off her shift, walk over to my room and come check on me, obviously all gowned up and everything, but it was a lot of things went right for how bad of a situation it was, which I'm grateful for sure.
It's interesting how that happens. I don't believe in coincidences.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I don't believe in coincidences. Everything happens for a reason, and it's like God put you through this, or whatever you believe in, put you through this and was like guiding you through and set it all up for you.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so many things had to go right for it to work out the way it did. And like, for instance, the fact that V-Shred was so willing to help out with my situation. If they weren't, I wouldn't have had the insurance to even go to a cancer center as good as MD Anderson. And who knows what that would have looked like, if they would have been able to do the same genetic, makeup of what kind of leukemia I had, if it would have been accurate. I mean, there's so many variables to how it could have gone differently, that it all went perfectly for that situation to work out.
Man, that's awesome. So what do you think was the toughest part? I know you mentioned probably your parents and seeing your parents. What was the toughest, the hardest part where you were like really struggling through this process?
The toughest part. One of the toughest parts was, so my grandma was already sick when I had been diagnosed, and actually right when I was getting diagnosed, I was supposed to fly out for her birthday that weekend. And I remember being pissed that like, I don't have time for this. I need to go to California. It's her birthday. She doesn't have a lot of time left. And so I never got to make it to her funeral because she passed. And it wasn't just her funeral and her passing away, because she was not in good shape and it was better for her. But it was the fact that right while my dad and my sister flew out to the funeral, I had just gotten done with one of my rounds of chemo. I was in nadir at home, and nadir's like your lowest point for people that are listening. And so I ended up getting sepsis. It's an infection, a really bad infection. Did you get infections in between your chemo
I
rounds?
didn't.
You did? Wow. So with mine, I don't want to speak to everybody's because obviously yours is different, but out of all of the rounds of chemo I did that were heavy chemo, only one time did I not end up with an infection. And this is with us being clean about everything. I mean, on top of everything. And it's just because your body's so low that anything can happen. And so I had just gotten off of FaceTime with the family, and then like 20 minutes later, my fever spikes. I start shaking uncontrollably. My mom's trying to like help me to the car. That entire process of like, she passed away, I'm having a terrible infection at the hospital, my mom's holding my legs down because I'm like shaking uncontrollably. Like, I'd say that was probably one of the lowest points physically. I think the lowest point mentally is when I was talking about that fork in the road moment, is I think that you truly have an opportunity where you could lose your mind. I got as close to it as I possibly could, and I felt like I peaked over the edge, and then I made a decision to come back. And that was, I would say, probably like a 2 to 3 day process from when it started one night to when I started to feel, okay, like things are kind of normalizing. And that was mentally the darkest place I had been, was during that time. So, yeah. What about for you?
For me, the toughest point was my second transplant, by far. I got to a point mentally and physically, but mentally, where I was really not in a good spot. I was very impatient, and if you know me, I'm a very patient person. I was very impatient, I was very irritable, I was just pissed off at everybody. I was just extremely negative, and that's really not me, and I can't thank the people in my life enough for understanding and going through that with me, and knowing like this is not him. Like, he's just going through a tough time, because I was pretty upset. I was extremely negative, and that was my dark time. It was not like just a couple days. It stemmed from going through a transplant before and having an expectation. And I always say don't have expectations on anything, because nothing ever goes according to plan.
That's right.
And so I had this expectation like, oh, I've done a transplant before. I'm gonna just do this again. I'm gonna just bust this out. It's gonna be all good. And so I'm getting through the transplant, and I get to the point where my cells are at the level where I can be released, but I keep spiking a fever every single day. And the doctors can't tell me why. And I'm honestly like so salty. like trying to get out of this hospital because I'm just trying to get out.
You're done with
like
it.
I'm done. I'm very irritable. And so they give me a bunch of steroids. They get me out. Once I wean off the steroids, I go back into the hospital for another week. The steroids probably helped me get to this point with my hip. So I probably like shot myself in the foot that way. But I was in a dark place from that point of getting out of the hospital, going back in for a week after my transplant, then eventually getting out and being at home, just trying to get to a point where I can build up strength again, where I can build up energy again. I remember I have an uncle, he came over, he loves to cook. Every time I see him, I'm always going over to his house for a barbecue. So he came over, he cooked us burgers. I remember that night, I couldn't even get up off the couch to like dap him up to tell him goodbye, to thank him for cooking me dinner and for coming through and like supporting me, you know. And that was definitely the darkest time. And after that, one of my buddies, that's how I actually came to this whole Beast vs. Zombie podcast. My buddy was like, yeah, man, you got through this, you're a beast. And I was telling him how much I felt like a zombie in the hospital, and I was hooked up to like 7 IVs of all these different medications. Yep. And that's where all this stems from. And that was the moment, like you said, you got over the hump, and I was like, I have to make something out of this. Right. That like it's kind of like a tragedy to triumph type mindset. And I always believed like successful people, however you want to call that, have that kind of mindset. And that was my goal with this, was to somehow take this tragedy, this cancer word, whatever you want to say, that was some of the worst times in my life, and making an advantage in my life. That was my goal with this, and that's how this all came to be.
Yeah. I think it's Hormozy that said, if you zoom far enough out of any bad situation, you see that it's actually a good situation. It's just you're too deep in it in that moment to realize it. But once you get far enough away from it, you see that it's actually something we can learn from and grow from. And yeah, it's a worthy challenge. That's what it is. It's a burden to bear.
Yeah, I agree. So just to wrap this up, we're gonna finish this. Just last question. What would you tell anybody going through some type of cancer, going through some type of tragedy, any kind of challenges, big or small in their life? Now that you've gone through this, what would you tell them to help them, or what would be the best advice you would give them to get through what they're going through now?
I'd say that it's a phrase that I've been using. I put it on my clothes as well. It's micro through the macro. It's when you can't handle everything that's going on around you, just break things down into the smallest possible thing that you can do in that moment, and just work one step at a time from there. Because there's times that during treatment, I was looking at the clock on the wall and I was just counting 15 seconds at a time just to see the clock tick. And I was just, okay, if you can make it 15 more seconds, 15 more seconds, 15, and that's all you can do. And at that moment, that's all I could do. And it worked because I'm still here. So I would say that the more you can break down your problems into small little things and just conquer one thing at a time, stack those wins, micro through the macro, that would be it.
Awesome. I completely agree with that. I'm a big believer on keeping things simple and planning and breaking everything, like you said, macro to micro.
Micro to macro.
Micro to macro.
Yeah, micro through the macro.
Micro through the macro. So, but focusing on the next step right in front of you, right? Having a vision is important. Having a plan is important. I think that's all important, but you only have right now, and you can only focus on this next step. And you have to, like they say, lay this brick the best that you can. And if you lay a perfect brick every day, eventually you have a wall.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and they give you, when you first get your treatment or you're about to start treatment, they give you a packet that shows you everything you're going to go through, which I understand the reasoning behind it. So you understand what they're going to do to you, but it's also something that can be extremely overwhelming. So when you're handed that packet, understand that that's just a summary of everything that's going to go down. That's not tomorrow. It's, you know, it's over the entire process. And just keep it small. Keep it to what you're doing today, what you're doing, you know, right now. That's it.
Yeah. Cool. That's all we have today on this episode of Beast vs. Zombie. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Sonny,
Thanks for having me, man.
for coming on and sharing your story. It's inspiring.
Glad to do it.
Please share where they can follow you and find you and help support Infinite Motive.
Infinite.motive on Instagram, infinitemotive.com is our website, and Infinite Motive Official on YouTube.
Cool. So,
thanks a lot.
Yeah, I hope you guys understand. Sonny and I, we're just completely normal people. We have 2 hands, 2 arms, a brain, a heart that's beating, you know, and if we can overcome cancer in our lives, you can overcome any challenges in your life. So make sure to go and follow the podcast, Beast vs. Zombie, on all social media platforms. Subscribe on YouTube and Spotify to catch the full videos and to stay tuned for new episodes. And please make sure to share with your friends and family. Everybody is going through some type of challenge, big and small, in their life, even if they don't disclose it. And anybody can find inspiration and motivation in these stories. So have a good night, you guys. Be a beast.